So, what is hemophilia? Hemophilia is a bleeding disorder, a problem with a person's blood that makes them bleed longer than a person without hemophilia. No one can catch hemophilia. It's an inherited condition you have from birth, for your whole life. It's just part of who you are, like the color of your hair or the shape of your nose. Here's how it works. Your blood travels through your body in tubes called arteries, veins, and capillaries. Normally, when there's a tear or hole in one of these, bleeding starts, and different parts of the blood go to work to plug the hole. Blood cells called platelets gather at the opening, and other blood parts called clotting factors help hold the platelets together to form a clot that stops the bleeding. When a person has hemophilia, he doesn't have enough of one of those clotting factors he needs to form a clot, and he keeps bleeding longer than he should. Each person with hemophilia is missing one of two kinds of factors. If you're missing factor 8, you have hemophilia A. If you're missing factor 9, you have hemophilia B. Either one can be mild, moderate, or severe. Without regular treatment, having hemophilia means you'll bleed longer than you should if you get cut. But you don't have to have a cut to have a bleed. Sometimes, especially when you're active, the tiny capillaries inside a person's body will bleed, causing a bruise or pain in the joints. Not dealing with those kinds of bleeds can cause a lot of problems later, including arthritis at a young age. But the good news is, there are good treatments available that can help you manage hemophilia effectively. Treatments that replace the missing factor help your blood clot more like a person who doesn't have hemophilia. These treatments, when used properly, help you keep your bleeding under control so you can live a long, healthy life and follow your dreams without hemophilia ever holding you back.
What shape are your cells? Squishy cylinders? Jagged zigzags? You probably don't think much about the bodies of these building blocks, but at the microscopic level, small changes can have huge consequences. And while some adaptations change these shapes for the better, others can spark a cascade of debilitating complications. This is the story of sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease affects the red blood cells, which transport oxygen from the lungs to all the tissues in the body. To perform this vital task, red blood cells are filled with hemoglobin proteins to carry oxygen molecules. These proteins float independently inside the red blood cell's pliable donut-like shape, keeping the cells flexible enough to accommodate even the tiniest of blood vessels. But in sickle cell disease, a single genetic mutation alters the structure of hemoglobin. After releasing oxygen to tissues, these mutated proteins lock together into rigid rows. Rods of hemoglobin cause the cell to deform into a long, pointed sickle. These red blood cells are harder and stickier and no longer flow smoothly through the blood vessels. Sickled cells snag and pile up, sometimes blocking the vessel completely. This keeps oxygen from reaching a variety of cells, causing the wide range of symptoms experienced by people with sickle cell disease. Starting when they're less than a year old, patients suffer from repeated episodes of stabbing pain in oxygen-starved tissues. The location of the clogged vessel determines the specific symptoms experienced. A blockage in the spleen, part of the immune system, puts patients at risk for dangerous infections. A pileup in the lungs can produce fevers and difficulty breathing. A clog near the eye can cause vision problems and retinal detachment. And if the obstructed vessels supply the brain, the patient could even suffer a stroke. Worse still, sickled red blood cells also don't survive very long, just 10 or 20 days, versus a healthy cell's 4 months. This short lifespan means that patients live with a constantly depleted supply of red blood cells, a condition called sickle cell anemia. Perhaps what's most surprising about
As you're probably well aware, our DNA is like this humongous blueprint of information on how to make a human. Usually this massive document is packaged up nicely into a storage bin called a chromosome. Actually, usually we have 46 chromosomes that we use to neatly organize all our information, depending on how you define organize. Each of the 46 chromosomes is actually part of a pair of chromosomes, since you get one from each parent. so 23 pairs. If you wanted to make another human, first you'd have to find someone that feels the same way, and then you both contribute half your chromosomes, so one from each pair, right? 50-50. Now, what if someone contributes one too many? Say dad contributes 23 and mom contributes 24. Is that possible? Yes, and it's the basis of one of the most common chromosomal disorders, Down syndrome. Someone with Down syndrome has 47 chromosomes instead of 46. Specifically, they have an extra copy of chromosome 21. So instead of 2, they have 3. So Down syndrome is also known as trisomy 21. In other words, 3 chromosome 21s. Alright, so in order to package up half the chromosomes into either a sperm cell or an egg cell, you actually start with a single cell that has 46 chromosomes. Let's just say that we're making an egg cell for the mother. I'm just going to show one pair of chromosomes, but remember that all 23 pairs do this. So the process of meiosis starts, which is what produces our sex cells, and the chromosomes replicate. And so now they're sort of shaped like an X. Even though that there are 2 copies of DNA here, we still say that it's one chromosome, since they're hooked together in the middle by this thing called a centromere. Okay, now the cell splits in 2 and pulls apart the paired chromosomes. So in each of these cells, you've now got 23 chromosomes. Now the 2 copies of the chromosomes get pulled apart, and the cell splits again, which means 4 cells, each still with 23 chromosomes. Now these are ready to pair up with a sperm cell from dad that has 23 chromosomes as well, totaling to 46 chromosomes, and voila! 9 months down the road, you've got yourself a baby. Now, with Down syndrome, or trisomy 21, a process called non-disjunction accounts for about 95% of cases. Non-disjunction means the chromosomes don't split apart. If the chromosomes in this first step don't split apart, then one cell ends up with both chromosomes and the other gets none. Then the final result is 2 cells with an extra chromosome and 2 cells missing a chromosome. Non-disjunction can also happen in the second step though. So first step goes great, and both cells have a chromosome. But if they don't split apart in the second step, then the final result is 1 cell with an extra chromosome, 1 cell missing a chromosome, and 2 with the right number of chromosomes. Now if a sperm cell combines with any of these that have a duplicate of chromosome 21, then the combined cell will have 1 extra copy of chromosome 21. In other words, 3 chromosome 21s, or trisomy 21. In case you
Now that's a question. Cystic fibrosis is, well, a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Nearly 11,000 in the UK, and in the UK each week 2 people die from CF and 5 more babies are born with it, which probably means a lot of you are watching this in search of answers to that big question. So, let's get started. Cystic fibrosis is about genetics. You can't catch it, but if both your parents have the CF gene, there's a 1 in 4 chance you'll be born with the condition. About 1 in 25 people carry the gene, and most don't even know it. And I should say at the start, there's currently no getting rid of it. All sounds a bit gloomy, right? But whilst there's no cure, a lovely life is still possible. Just look at me. You see, I have CF, so I think I'm a good person to tell you a little bit more about it. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a faulty gene that disrupts the movement of salt and water in the body's cells, making the mucus in people with CF thicker and stickier. This sticky mucus causes problems, mainly in the lungs and digestive system, but also affects other parts of the body too. It's not nice. The small airways in the lungs can get clogged up with this mucus, causing infections and, over time, damage to the lungs. So, what does all that mean for everyday life? Well, here are some of the symptoms. Frequent chest infections, severe or prolonged coughs, wheezing or shortness of breath, abnormal bowel movements, difficulty gaining weight, and for most men, infertility. There's also the issue of never being able to meet up with anyone else with CF. Basically, we could make each other unwell because of the bugs and infections that get transmitted between people with the condition. For better or worse, CF is a part of me. It may be an unhealthy relationship, but there are a lot of daily treatments to tackle cystic fibrosis effectively, which can make our union that bit more harmonious. a whole host of antibiotics to fight infections in my lungs. They're not all that colourful, but you get the idea. Physiotherapy to help shift the mucus that builds up around my organs. Enzyme capsules to take with food. They're really not that hard to swallow. And talking of food, we need a special high-fat diet to make sure our bodies get all the nutrients that it needs. And more drugs to thin that sticky mucus. People with CF sometimes need to take over 40 tablets a day. It's a burden for sure, but it's the preferred option. If conventional treatments no longer work, a lung transplant might be needed. Cystic fibrosis presents daily compromises and challenges, but with careful management and the right treatment, people with CF can lead full and happy lives. Work, travel, family, it's all possible. Recent figures suggest that half of people with CF will live past their 47th birthday. But it's also thought that a baby born today with cystic fibrosis could live longer as life expectancy continues to increase with the amazing advances in treatment and care. So, what is cystic fibrosis? It's a serious condition, but one that an army of people out there are very serious about beating for good.